Hi, everybody. You are all heroes for being at a talk at 3:30 on the second day, so I appreciate that. It's also sufficiently few people that if you would like to sling abuse at me real time, please just do that. I'm totally fine.
Did any of this really happen?
It's gonna happen. So yeah, I think it started. So this talk is called You, Me, and the HSM, End-to-End Encryption's Move to Hardware. So my name is Eric. I recently co-founded a startup called Oblique. We're kind of like in the IGA group management space. So if you struggle with Okta, come hit us up. And that's the one time I will mention Oblique in this entire talk. Previously, I was at the Google security org in the corporate side for about 6+ years, doing all sorts of weird stuff with Linux devices and firewalls. And I've also been involved in the Kubernetes community around SIGAuth specifically, and all of the wonderfulness of RBAC, which is, yeah, the less said about that, the better. So we're gonna give a totally out of the blue talk in terms of my background. We're gonna talk today about end-to-end encryption, and specifically some weird cases where end-to-end encrypted services are starting to use hardware security modules in places that might surprise you and might not. I will also give this one disclaimer this one time. I am not a cryptographer. So if you make any decisions based off of any of the cryptography I go on over in this slide, that's on you. So yeah, we're going to go to and talk about end-to-end encryption really briefly, just to get everybody on the same page. We're also going to talk about 3 interesting usages of hardware security modules in end-to-end encryption, specifically talking about WhatsApp, X or Twitter, and then Signal, everyone's favorite. So first, just to square and make sure we all have the same definitions, end-to-end encryption is largely the set of things that involve me having a conversation with you, somebody, and the server is adversarial. So you can kind of construct some pretty easy ways of doing this. If I have your public key, I can just encrypt stuff to it and you can decrypt it. That's the old GPG way as an example. If you're kind of familiar with the algorithms that happen or the protocols that happen in things like WhatsApp and Signal, you'll learn that it gets incredibly crazy very quickly. You renegotiate keys on every single message. But the core takeaway is that I'm sending data through a server that I inherently don't trust. And that server should also not be able to see any of the contents of that message. So I text hello on one phone, you get it on yours, and the server can't see it. And end-to-end encryption is really starting to be the standard for lots of places that you would not necessarily even consider to be like a privacy-focused organization. There are some names on here that you like or don't like, but I think when you look at stuff like the amount of law enforcement requests to companies, in researching this, I was looking at some of the transparency logs that they, or the transparency reports that they put out, and Meta gets 600,000 requests a year from law enforcement, which you could you even go through an inbox with 600,000 things in it, right? So I think that all the big companies are feeling this pressure of this is a huge cost center for them, right? Being able to have to respond to all of these or figure out you can't have a lawyer look at one of those. So I think that more and more you're seeing services realize, oh wait, if we just put everything behind end-to-end encryption, then suddenly we have a really good excuse when we say, sorry, we just can't deal with that request. No comment. You're also, you're also seeing this in places that really, I think were really appropriate. 1Password is a good example. You want your password manager to not have a world where 1Password get hacked and suddenly all your passwords show up. And there's also weird ones like Ring just had gotten hot water for giving your video recordings over to police and implemented some amount of end-to-end encryption that you can optionally turn on. And as end-to-end encryption becomes more of a thing that we all use, rather than just maybe the privacy-focused set of people who go to Bsides, the real problem here is that if you lose your key, you're screwed, right? You cannot go to the service provider and say hi, I forgot my password. Can you just reset it and give me back all my data? And you can see this in basically all the warnings for anything that's opt-in of hello, quick reminder, we cannot save you if you, get yourself in trouble. And what's really, really weird about this is you're starting to see a lot of UIs that look like this. So this is X encrypted DMs, which is just behind a 4-digit PIN. And again, I'm not a cryptographer, but what? How does X, when it gets a law enforcement request, say, I'm sorry, officer, I could not possibly guess 10,000 pins. There's no way we could ever unlock that. And the secret behind some of this is this hand-wavy thing called hardware security modules. You probably all have in your head, if you go to RSA, there's hardware security module vendors everywhere, and you have your head this I don't know, thing that you stick in a server rack. Hardware security modules just mean some code running somewhere with some tamper-proof thing on it, right? So when I talk about HSMs today, don't think about, you have to store private keys. Just think about, okay, there's something that has some guarantees about the software that's running on it, and that, if you got physical access to it, you probably couldn't do too much to it. Cool. So this is the meat and potatoes. We get to talk about WhatsApp. Okay. So WhatsApp has a service called Backup Key Vault. This is described in a 2021 white paper that articulates a bit of how they use hardware security modules to protect both the passwords and the pins that you enter in to encrypt all of your devices, or to encrypt all your messages. This has now been extensively used within Meta for many, many other services. So things like Messenger is now totally end-to-end encrypted. They went through a huge effort to encrypt all of the historical data in Messenger. So if you go in and you do that, actually, this is what the UI looks like. This is me locking myself out of Messenger in preparation for this talk because I forgot the pin. So already we can see that pins are not perfect, but this is kind of the user experience, right? You show up on a phone that has no data whatsoever. You show up and it says, please enter, in this case, it's a 6-digit pin. And some of these have options where you can say, I want to do an alphanumeric password. Again, Twitter is explicitly, or X, is explicitly a 4-digit pin. The architecture for WhatsApp's HSM architecture, again, just think of HSM as some specialized code running in some hardware, is they run an entire cluster of HSMs that all have a consensus protocol running between them. And then there's a protocol called noise that is actually used in a few of the examples that we're talking about. Noise is very similar to, is used in WireGuard and is very similar to TLS. And it's just the hot new cryptographic thing where if you want to set up a tunnel while you have 2 public-private key pairs, that's what noise is used for. So what WhatsApp does is they publish, here's the public keys of all of the HSMs, and then when you go to have a conversation with it, you use that to set up an encrypted tunnel. And it uses a particular password protocol called opaque that I think is really quite interesting and that we're going to go into it right now. So a traditional password authentication protocol works like this. You send the password over to the server, and the server adds assault and uses an algorithm like Argon or historically bcrypt to harden that. And the combination of those two produces an output that you can check to see did somebody enter the right password. And you can arbitrarily turn up the pain basically in terms of either the amount of CPU or the amount of memory that these algorithms require. So if you accidentally leak the result of these, it would be hard to brute force in the background. Unfortunately, this is not very end-to-end of you to accept the user's password, right? Step 1, send me your password does not cut it in sort of a scenario where you do not trust the server. So we're going to have to talk about one particular thing, cryptographic protocol, which is called an oblivious random function, pseudo-random function, excuse me, for all the cryptographers out there. So the way that an oblivious pseudo-random function works is that I have some data, like a password or something, and I would like to combine it with some other data that the server has. This could literally be elliptic curve private keys or assault or something like that. And the result of this cryptographic primitive is an output that the client sees that is deterministic, that is the same result every single time, but neither the client or the server ever learns anything about either side, the password or the salt. So in this case, the server would not learn anything about the password, and the client would not learn anything about the salt, and the client always gets the same result. You can implement this with elliptic curves kind of classically, where you basically take your password, you map it to a point on an elliptic curve, and you take a really big random number and multiply that. The output is called a blinded result. Send that to the server multiplies it by its private value. You come back, do some modular inverse, and you get a result. So it's basically a cryptographic way to take my input times the server input and get a result. And because of math, this is hard to reverse in the other direction. The problem with this, if you're thinking about stuff like a pin where you want to do pin backoff, right? If you enter the wrong pin, I want to know that as the server, is that the server doesn't get any information here. So even if I have the right password, I have no way of proving to the server that I have actually entered the right password on this particular side. So I could keep on retrying without the server knowing. This is where we get into this really fancy, cool new protocol called opaque, which is from classic, I think it's from like 2017. So that's like bleeding edge in terms of cryptography. Anything not out of the 90s is like great. And the trick is to combine that pseudo-random function with a key exchange. So the first thing you do is you try to exchange some keys, and there'll be a diagram on the next slide to demonstrate this. And you use the output, that result, to encrypt a private key, and you give that to the server. And then later on, if you can decrypt that, you use that private key to prove to the server and say, like, okay, I was able to decrypt this, and therefore you can reset the pin retries. So it kind of looks like this. You have the output. I pass this through a hardening function, which is even cooler. This is all in the sense of pin retries, but you can actually just use this for authentication too. And that result encrypts my private key. I give it to the server, and if I am able to decrypt that later, then I've proved that I've entered the right password. One nifty part of this, if you're using this just for authentication, is actually the client is doing all of like the bcrypt or the Argon2, so your server can actually offload all of that computation onto the clients, which is great. And then there's a little note in here around, okay, don't worry. If you try the wrong pin too many times, we re-render this totally unacceptable. And the source is, trust us, right? This is kind of the weird part that we get to at the talk, where certainly in WhatsApp, there is no evidence in other than white papers that they are doing those pin backoffs, that there is even a cluster of HSMs somewhere, and you just kind of have to trust it. And WhatsApp is a weird space in general. Like, they are one of the anti-encrypted services that like stores all of your metadata, for example, about the messages. So maybe this is correct, but this kind of hits another set of problems, which is like, how do we know those servers are doing the right thing? This is where we talk about X, or Twitter. Okay, so X encrypted DMs. It's a 4-digit code pin, always. And it has a similar setup of a cluster of HSMs to do this. And they use a really interesting protocol called Juicebox, which I'm going to get into in a little bit. And Juicebox, one of the authors is Moxie Moreland-Spike, who you might know from Signal. So he and a bunch of cryptographers got together and wrote an incredibly complicated thing that I'm going to try to explain in a bit. One small note, for X encrypted messengers, your AI girlfriend and boyfriends are not encrypted. So that's, do with that what you will. I would think that this is the one thing you want X not to be able to see, but that's their own choice. All right, so Juicebox. The idea behind Juicebox is, you know what? It's really hard to trust one person to do pin backoff or pin retries backoff. What if we somehow split this between 3 people or 4 people or 5 people or whatever your threshold can be? So the whole goal of here is that maybe I don't trust one individual sort of entity or tenant, or realm is what they're called, to do the correct thing in terms of backing off the pins or backing off the pin retries. But maybe if we split this responsibility between a few people, that it would take a lot to coordinate between all of those sets of entities to recover your, do the brute forcing across these. And sometimes this can run in hardware, it can run in software. Again, HSMs are just specialized hardware that runs software. The way it works, and this is the hand-waviest part of the talk in all capacities, there's a thing called Shamir's secret sharing. If you've ever used Vault and done the unlock, what it does is you can take a random value and you can say, I would like to split it against n number of shards with a certain threshold. So 5 and 3, maybe. And you get out some math bits. And if you can recover any of those 3, any permutation of those 3, you can recover the input. And again, this is used for Vault. You can to do their master key unlock, where you split that key between a certain number of shares, and you use that to recover the core disk encryption key. Juicebox, which again is far, 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 far more complicated than this slide entails, is basically splitting your pin into many different shares and then running an oblivious random function, pseudo-random function algorithm on top of that. Again, this is a little bit more complicated than just doing opaque several different times. But yeah, check out the research paper if you're interested in this kind of stuff. So yeah, it splits it across different realms. We can then at least say you'd have to coordinate between 3 of 5 realms in order to brute force this, right? That would have to be agreement between many parties, which is great because this actually happens a lot where security teams are like, well, if one person was able to push code, that would be problematic. But if you had to have review, then we're all good, right? Like you add the n+1 and it makes collusion much harder. In terms of trusting the HSMs, so weirdly, X runs all of the realms themselves, but we'll get to in the next slide. They just recorded themselves unboxing the HSMs and racking them. And it's like a 7-hour total of video with like some notes about what public keys was extracted out of them. I did not watch that all for the purposes of this talk, but maybe maybe this will cause you to trust X. Who knows? As soon as it came out that X was using this, the authors of Juicebox immediately published a paper saying, this completely defeats the purpose of Juicebox. The whole point is to have the tenants running by different realms, or realms by different organizations. It doesn't make sense if you're doing this all under the same space. My theory of why X is doing this is what's nice about Juicebox is you can avoid the need for a consensus protocol between your HSMs because you need to consult every single one. So rather than having to do all this crazy like Paxos or Raft between your HSMs, which sounds very complicated, you just say, okay, I'm running this in a redundant matter, and you have to consult many of these to do the pin back off. Anyway, you can take whatever you want from this, but yeah, I would be reticent to not mention that the Juicebox authors are not particularly enthusiastic about this particular setup. Which is where we get to everyone's favorite, Signal. So Signal has a pin system. It has at minimum 4 digits. You can answer alphanumeric. Who has actually seen this and has no idea what the heck it does? Okay, yeah, like most of you. Great. This is used to encrypt your contacts and certain metadata about groups. It importantly is not used for signal secure backups, which is in beta right now. And I think a little bit of it was because of some of the feedback they got on the slides I'm about to go over in some of the by some of the prominent like cryptographers in the community. It's got to be hard to be Signal, right? You got to like do everything at the top level. All right, but the coolest part is that it's all open source. Somehow this repo only has 58 stars and is like some of the more interesting cryptography I've seen. But the system is called Secure Value Recovery. There's been several different versions. This is 2, but it actually holds all the code for version 2, 3, and 4. And earlier versions of this use a system called Intel SGX. So I talked a little bit about how HSMs are just places that you can run code. One of the primitives of that kind of a thing is called a trusted execution environment. This is a generalized term for, I don't know, a trusted space in your computer to run. This is where, like, if you have a trusted platform module, the code that implements that might be in this space. They are definitely very resource-constrained environments. You don't get an operating system in those spaces, so you don't get things like threads that developers love. So it's generally not a fun place to develop in, but you can write very resource-constrained stuff to run in there. The cool part about this is that if you're running within an Intel XGX trusted execution environment, you can ask that environment for a quote, which is an attestation that you are running there, and then any measurements about the code that is running in that environment. And the signatures chain back to the Intel certificate authorities, which is really cool. It's incredibly complicated how those certificates are provisioned, but we actually don't have to worry about this in this talk, so I'm definitely not going to go into it. I would also had to put this in there. Security researchers love hacking these things. There have been dozens of attacks since Intel put these on the market. They do run in specific cloud providers, but if you talk to a security researcher, they'll probably be like, yeah, we could probably hack into that. So again, think about that what you will. The way it works is that, oh no. Excuse me. The way it works is that the code that's running in the trusted execution environment generates a key pair as it's running, and then requests a quote over that key pair. That quote includes, again, the public key, as well as the measurement of the exact hash of the data that's running there. You then do a noise protocol, I think even between clients as well as individualized HSMs. And the client, while it's doing that connection, will pull out that quote, attest up to Intel that is the correct one, validate the hash, and then validate that the key that's in the quote is being used to have that conversation. So you're now at the point where you have a strong confidence that the conversation on the other side is running in this trusted execution environment. And you can see this just in libsignal itself. So if you have Signal on your phone, these hashes are just embedded in the client that you're running, where all it says is, for every single version, these are the hashes that we accept. And when you do this handoff, the first thing you do is say, does the hash that Intel attested to match this hash, so you know that you're talking to a known piece of software. And then there have been several versions of this. So V1 was basically doing raft-based syncing between different trusted execution environments, so you could run multiples of these. These do the same noise handoff where they have to be talking to the same piece of software. Actually, there might be a chicken and egg there, but let's ignore that. And then all it was doing for a while is just, I have a PIN and a private key, and I'll store the PIN. If you guess the PIN correctly, here's the private key. There was a rewrite for scalability, and then in V3, they added support for other execution environments. Nitro was one of them from AWS, and the Snap, or I forget what the other one is. They also switched to the oblivious pseudorandom function-based print protocol, so they no longer store your PIN, they store whatever the input for that protocol is required. So I'm about at time, and I think what you might all be asking is this end-to-end encrypted? And I think what I love about the messiness of these particular schemas is that it really hammers home that cryptography is never stands alone. It's always integrated in hardware and software, and you have to trust organizations, and it's awful. Just the fact that you think that the version of Signal running on your phone is the correct version already has many leaps and bounds to get there. And I think that what's really cool about these PIN derivation things is that it's just putting this right in your face of like, hey, sorry, you don't actually just get to trust math. That would be a great world. You have to trust the organizations that they're doing the right things and that they've actually done the steps to encrypt your data to get you the client that you expect and all of this good things. Ask Pete Hegseth about that. And that's it, right at time. So thank you. The slides are done. We have a question in the back. Also, you can just come find me too afterwards. I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned Moxie and you had a slide on Grok. Have you been looking into any of his work on private inference?
Yeah, so Confer is really interesting, which is what you're talking about. Confer actually uses passkeys instead. I actually wrote a blog about this. If you go to oblique.security and go to blog, I wrote a thing about how passkeys are actually the new generation of this, where you don't enter a PIN. There's a special extension to the passkey that is used to establish your end-to-end data with whatever. Whether or not you trust that the LLM is running in the TEE, I'll leave that to you.
Is there any published work
or have you seen anybody talking about the risk of forcing account lockouts by sort of maliciously trying pins? And are there protections in place, like if you have an existing account you can control?
So the question was if you're malicious and want to force the retries and break that. So anything in this is not unauthenticated. You've already logged in correctly to the correct WhatsApp account or Facebook account or Signal. You've established that you have this phone number. So it's generally post-authentication here, and then at the point where they're in your thing, you're cooked anyway, right? Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.